Hello, Year 7. This is Mr. Palmer. Hope you all had a nice half term and some relaxing times. So this is your first lesson back. We're carrying on with this scheme of learning we've been doing before, but I've changed it up here a bit to show that we're entering into term 6, even though this is still the work from term 5. And this is lesson 5, which is revising different types of punctuation. And this is part 1 of that lesson, which is revision. So we had some requests to break the work up a bit into different videos, which I think makes sense. So I've started to break the lessons down a bit. So this is part 1, and this is for the week beginning Monday the 1st of June 2020. Reminder, our scheme of learning is creative writing and experiencing other cultures. Our big question is, how do writers present various places around the world? Remembering always that we're thinking about how we do it because we're doing the writing this lesson, this scheme. And then our learning path skills that we're covering are skill 8 vocabulary, skill 9 language techniques, and skill 10 sentences and punctuation. And if you want, you can pause there and have a look at the learning path skills. And for this lesson, we're going to be focusing on sentences and punctuation. Now, in my previous lessons, I did do some talking through sentences and punctuation, but I haven't done it quite as explicitly as I'm going to do in this. So if you have any feedback from your teacher about sentences and punctuation, you should be able to go right ahead and do it after having gone through it in quite a lot of detail this lesson. So what we've done so far is we've used figurative SOSMAP techniques for effect in our writing. We've used vocabulary and semantic field to create tone. We did that in this order, not the order I said it, but there we go. And you've written a piece of descriptive writing which you've submitted to be marked by your teacher. You'll be getting that back next Monday with another lesson which will be doing your dirt work on that, but more on that to come. So I'm going to start and I'm going to talk you through each of the individual bits of punctuation, and I'm going to give you an example sentence, and I'm going to ask you to write your own sentence. Now the first one, I hope you all know already, is the full stop. So a full stop is used to end any complete sentence. So a complete sentence is something that makes sense. It has all the information that you need in it. For example, we have Ellie played football and then followed by a full stop. So what you don't need to be doing this lesson is writing down these definitions. They're all on your knowledge organizer anyway, so don't worry about those. But what you do need to be doing is writing down your own example. So I've told you about Ellie playing football, and I want you to write a sentence now about Josh. If you can, please try and keep it away from football. Try and do a different subject matter for your ones, because it will help you think about how those bits of punctuation work. Pause there and write your own sentence about Josh. And then we'll move on. We're going to go through the end stop punctuations first. So the next one of those, these are the end stop are the ones that we use to end sentences, is an exclamation mark. And it's used in place of a full stop to mark the end of a sentence, showing a strong feeling, used to emphasize that feeling. That feeling could be happiness or shock or sadness or anger, but it's to draw attention to the fact that the person writing that sentence is trying to show a feeling of some sort. Ellie scored a goal. So in that example, if we're on Ellie's side, we're happy about that. That's excitement. Maybe if we're not on Ellie's side, that would be sort of anger or disappointment that would show. But either way, we know that that exclamation mark there is telling us that the writer is trying to show a feeling with that. So again, trying to keep away from using football as an example. Can you write a sentence about Josh with an exclamation mark at the end? Pause there. And if we move on, our final piece of end stop punctuation is the question mark, which we use in place of a full stop to mark the end of a sentence which asks a question. So our example here is going to be, how could Ellie ever play football again? If you notice, my voice went up at the end then because I was answering a question. And the question mark indicates, in the same way that my voice going up does when I'm speaking, the question mark indicates that what goes before it is a question. So I want you to write your question about Josh. Pause there. Now we're going to move on to some slightly more complicated uses of punctuation within sentences. So our first example of in-sentence punctuation is commas, used for subordinate clauses at the start of sentences. Now, whenever you start a sentence with a subordinate clause, you must follow that clause with a comma. And as a reminder, a subordinate clause does not make sense by itself. It must be attached to a main clause in a sentence. It gives us extra information about that sentence. In our example here, after she played football, Ellie was tired. So I want you to write an example now for Josh. You can pause there. And if we move on, another use for commas is for lists. So we use after each item in a list to separate them. So, for example, Ellie needed lots of kit for playing football: shin pads, football boots, shorts, and a football kit. Notice also here the colon used to start the list here. We'll come on later to how colons are used, because there is a special way that we need to make sure we use those. But in this sentence, it's being used to introduce that list there. So over to you to write your list about Josh. Remember to try and keep that away from football if you can. Pause there. And we'll move on to another use for commas, which is for fronted adverbials. So much like the subordinate clause, whenever we start with a fronted adverbial, we must follow that with a comma. And a fronted adverbial is a word or a phrase used to explain how, where, or when something happened, and it goes at the start of a sentence. For example, at school, Ellie played football. So I want you to do one there for Josh with a fronted adverbial, and I'll let you pause while you do that. Remember to keep the comma in. We'll move on now. It's a good time to mention before we go on to this next one that with all those sentences, I do hope you've used full stops at the end of all your sentences you've used commas with, and capital letters at the start. So maybe quickly pause now and go back and check those. But now we'll go on with the commas for extra information. So you can also add extra information into a sentence. If it's at the end of the sentence, you use one comma before it. For example, Ellie played football, her favourite sport. We could have a sentence, we did earlier, that just said Ellie played football, but we've added that information there that it's her favourite sport. So we've used the comma to add that information in there. And we've used a full stop there to end the sentence. So have a go for Josh there. You could just use your first sentence and add some extra information into it if you wanted to. Remember that full stop at the end. So pause the video. And then if we carry on, we can also put that information into the middle of the main clause, and that's called an embedded clause, and you need two commas, one each side of your piece of information. So Ellie, who really enjoyed sports, played football. Again, Ellie played football is a complete sentence, and in the middle there we've got that extra information. So again, you can use your first Josh sentence and put some information into the middle there. Remember, two commas and a full stop at the end. Pause the video there. And then we'll talk about apostrophes. So apostrophes have two uses, and the first one we're going to talk about is to show possession. So it tells us that something belongs to someone. For example, Ellie's football boots were really comfortable, and here we put the apostrophe there because the football boots belong to Ellie. Note there's no other time when there's an S in a word that you would need to put an apostrophe in, except for the following examples. So you would never, for example, on boots or anything like that, you wouldn't need that apostrophe because the boots don't own anything. Ellie owns the boots, and that apostrophe there tells us about that. So can you write a sentence about something that Josh owns? Remember to put that full stop at the end of it. Pause the video there. And the second use of apostrophe is to show contraction or omission. So when we put two words together and we miss some out. So the apostrophe shows where those missing letters would go. Our example is Ellie couldn't play football today because it was raining. And here we've actually got two words, could and not. Ellie could not play football today, but we shrunk them into one word, couldn't. And to show that, we've used the apostrophe there where the O would be. So couldn't is now a word in itself. So Ellie couldn't play football today because it was raining. So other words that you contract are words like can't or don't or didn't or won't or wouldn't. So those are contracted words. And your job is to write a sentence with a contracted word about Josh. Remember, apostrophe where you shrunk the word down and a full stop at the end. Pause the video there. And we'll move on now to Semicolons. So semicolons are used to separate two complete sentences. So you use them instead of a full stop. And the two sentences are kind of related. So the second one needs to explain or conclude or be about the same thing as the first. But they must be sentences that make sense by themselves. And you do not need to use a capital letter after the semicolon, just at the start of the sentence. So Ellie was tired. She had played football for hours on a blazing hot day. So we could have a sentence that was Ellie was tired, full stop. She had played football for hours on a blazing hot day, full stop. But this time we've used a semicolon so that we're joining the idea of those two sentences together. It can also replace a conjunction. So we could have said Ellie was tired because she had played football for hours on a blazing hot day. But again, this time we've used a semicolon. So your example, Josh was what? And then how will you sum that up? Remember, we don't use a conjunction. We don't use a connective here. We just write two separate sentences, both of which are about the same subject, or the second one explains the first. I'll let you pause there. And we're going to talk about colons. We referenced these earlier, so let's look at the rules for colons. So they are used to introduce a list. But the part before the colon needs to make sense by itself. So in this one here, which is the same one we used earlier, Ellie needed a lot of kit for playing football, colon, shin pads, football boots, shorts, and a football shirt. Notice that this bit here before the colon, that could be a full sentence. We could get rid of that bit there, and it would just be a full sentence. This bit afterward would make no sense, but this bit does. Okay, so if we had said something like, for example, then we wouldn't be using the colon there. So a colon is used to introduce a list when all this bit here makes sense by itself. Remembering we also need those commas between the words, and we need a full stop at the end. Over to you. What did Josh want? I'll let you pause there. We'll move on to brackets or dashes. Now these can be used in the same way. They go around that extra information. So we could use them instead of commas in those embedded clauses or parentheses. Yep. So brackets or dashes do the same things as commas in that case. They give you a bit of extra information. Ellie played football, her favourite sport. Ellie played football, her favourite sport. We could know that Ellie was playing football without having to know that it was her favourite sport, but this is giving us extra information about that. It doesn't have to be that it's her favourite sport. It could have said her least favourite sport or something she didn't want to do. But in this case, it's telling us that it's her favourite sport. So we put it in brackets or we put a dash to join those two together. So over to you for that one. I'd like you to do both. You can do the same sentence, but in one of them I want you to use a dash, in one of them I want you to use the brackets. So pause there. And then the other way we could do it is in the middle of a sentence. So much like we did with the commas there. So the previous ones were ending the sentence, and in this one it's in the middle. So have a go with those as well. Pause there. And then we have finally hyphen, which is our last piece of punctuation. So this is the end of part 1 of the lesson. A hyphen is used to join words or parts of words. Don't get confused with a dash. A dash is for the sentences. A hyphen is to join two words together that need to be joined together. Ellie played football on a blazing hot day. So over to you for Josh. What did Josh do? Remember to use a hyphen there and a full stop at the end. So year 7, that's the end of the first part of the lesson. So that's all the facts and the practice. In the next part, we're going to be looking at some writing I've done about a picture, and then you're going to try your own writing. You can, if you want, go straight on to part 2, or if you want to take a break and come back later, then you can use this opportunity at the end of the video to do that. So you'll hear my voice again soon, no doubt.